Hello, normally this would be a Valorant patch notes rundown for 7.10, but there's not too much that's been changed. There's been some combat clarity for Jett, there's team deathmatch changes, and some bug fixes. The biggest thing in this patch are the Deadlock changes, and I think they're not really that big for the actual game itself, but they're big for the conversation. So I'm going to talk about Deadlock. So I'm going to talk about the changes first, and I'm going to go over the paragraph. You can read that in your own time if you want to. But I'm going to go talk about these changes first. So anyone caught by GravNet will now be debuffed indefinitely until they remove it. Anyone caught by GravNet will now be affected by increased gravity and reduction in mobility. So GravNet now reduces tailwind distance. GravNet radius increased from 6 meters to 8 meters. So the first thing, and probably the best thing, is that the GravNet debuff will be indefinite, which means that they will have to make sound at some point when they get caught by it. So, and obviously they can just keep it on them, and because they're only crouched, technically they are under really no obligation to get rid of it if they're actively fighting something. So they don't have to give away their position if it's new information that you're going to be getting with the net, right? So that if they get caught by it, they don't have to immediately remove it, and they can just peek into a crouched enemy, and it's very likely that you could even die if they're in like an off angle, right? So I don't think it's a great buff necessarily, but I think it can be nice if thrown in the right places, and it can give you some nice information. Anyone caught by GravNet will now be affected by increased gravity and reduction in mobility. So I would have liked to see them add a silence to mobility in the net, so they can't use TPs, they can't use dashes, they can't use updraft, they can't use satchels, whatever, right? I would think that made a lot more sense personally, especially if they're trying to make Deadlock strong. I think it would make a lot more sense if they just flat out remove the ability for people to TP away when affected by the net. I think it would make a lot more sense. I also think that increased gravity is actually potentially enough. And the reason why is because increased gravity means that the enemy is going to land faster, which means once they land on the ground, they're going to be able to shoot faster, right? In the air, they can't shoot you very accurately, but when they're crouched on the ground, they definitely can shoot you accurately. So I actually would have liked to have seen decreased gravity, even though it may not have made necessarily that much thematical sense with the GravNet. It definitely would have made this ability stronger, and definitely not weaker. Like, I think normal gravity would be stronger than increased gravity, personally. Maybe, I mean, obviously in certain situations, like if Jett is trying to dash up draft into a site, then this increased gravity might actually be better. But the thing is that it's so unlikely to catch her doing that, as opposed to anything else. On top of that as well, catching airborne enemies. I don't think this is really that massive, but I do think it's still, overall not that big. The removal time being increased is quite good. They have to basically not be able to shoot for 1.5 seconds, which is really, really good. They can cancel it at any time though. They can just tap it and not do it. They can bait you to come and peek them or something. So it's not exactly the best either, but it is still pretty good that to remove it they do have to, if they're under a time constraint, then this is meaningful time that they might lose. And then GravNet radius increase, which should apparently supposedly to them make it more reliable, but I think the reliability, or at least the problem with the reliability for Deadlock's GravNet, stems in the context of the ability. As I said, talking about Jett sort of draft and dash, right? If you get value while that's happening, that's good, right? Problem is, how many times does that actually happen in rounds? And not only that, how many times will you actually be able to catch them with a GravNet during that very small window of time? And I think that if your ability thrives in such small windows of time, it's going to be inconsistent contextually, right? Okay, so with all that said, about how she has been changed, I'm going to talk about how she fits into the game, or rather how she doesn't really fit into the game. So the biggest thing about Deadlock is that she is a sentinel that doesn't fit or doesn't align with the strongest identity of a sentinel. So the strongest identity of a sentinel is very similar to how you would see Killjoy or how you would see Cypher, where they can get passive information or control places across the map, right? And I think Deadlock doesn't really fit into that category, at least very easily. And she's definitely not the strongest in that category. And that's very similar to Sage, right? Where Sage doesn't really fit into that identity, and you can see she has her own problems with it too. Obviously, to a lesser extent than Deadlock has, but I think that could also be because of people like healing in games. People definitely overrate healing in Valorant. And generally, she's also a part of the main cast of characters, so people are going to feel potentially sentimental about Sage. The Sage herself does have a problematic design. She doesn't exactly fit into the strongest identity of a Sentinel, and she's also a very good example of if something is strong, then she'll be meta. But if she gets slightly balanced or slightly made weaker, nerfed, then she's going to be completely weak. She's going to be the weakest, one of the weakest things ever, right? Very, very coin flippy, fragile type abilities that are really strong when they're strong and really weak when they're weak. I think there is potential that Deadlock is going to be one of those agents that's weak, that's really weak when she's weak and really strong when she's strong. But I don't know yet because I haven't seen her strong. Next, I want to talk about Deadlock's GravNet ability, even though we have been talking about it. It's basically an initiator ability, sort of like randomly put onto a Sentinel's kit. And I want to talk a bit about Skye, right? Because I think Skye has the biggest example of this, where she has the bird, the dog, and the cabbages, or the ult. And those three abilities right now are really strong. And they play really well into what she wants to do. She wants to get kills in the round, and she wants to get information in the round. Initiators really like those two things. Plays into very much what the initiator is trying to do. It plays into the strongest identity of an initiator. The heal doesn't do anything for that. And the thing is that right now it doesn't mean anything because the three abilities surrounding the heal are really strong. When those three abilities are weak, the heal is going to make those abilities feel weaker than they are because the heal itself doesn't play into any of the any of the goals that she's trying to achieve. So the heal is going to feel weak, and then it's going to make the rest of the kit feel weak because it's there, right? And I think Deadlock is also the same, where she has the GravNet, which is going to make the rest of the kit feel a bit weaker than it is, because it's an initiator ability that's not trying to achieve the same goals as the rest of the kit is. Because the GravNet itself is a very unreliable ability when it actually is trying to achieve the rest of the things that the Sentinel kit is trying to achieve. Because you need to have such really tight timing windows to make the GravNet a Sentinel ability, but to make it a set play initiator ability, it's a lot more forgiving. Sorry, I just smacked the mic. It makes it a lot more forgiving as an ability, right? Think about it like C's, right? Fade C's, where it makes a lot more sense for it to be a set play ability, and initiators like to be with their teammates. They like to be on the strong side. They like to be in the 3-man or the 4-man, or mainly the 3, really, realistically. And Sentinels themselves don't like to be in the strong side. They like to be in the weak side because they're able to operate in the weak side stronger than basically other agents can. Cypher can manage 3 choke points at once, right? Obviously, you can't control them necessarily, but he can get information in them. And that is the strongest sort of identity of a Sentinel. And while I don't think Deadlock will be able to, it does fit that identity, I do think she does struggle from having multiple influences from different roles. And obviously there are agents that thrive with that, like Chamber, for instance. And Chamber does thrive with that because the idea of his version of a Sentinel was to lock down the site, right? And that's also a part of the strongest identity of a Sentinel. They like to lock down sites, right? And Chamber was really good at that. And he wasn't only good at that because of his Sentinel version, the Sentinel part of him. He was good at that because of the duelist part of him as well. And that's because he was playing with a core part of the game, where if the enemy is dead, they cannot interact with you anymore. So his duelist parts that were able to get him kills interacted directly with the fact that he could lock down the site because the enemy was dead, because he was killing them with the duelist part of him. And then he was also making his Sentinel part better because he was locking down the site. So he made both parts of him a lot better being combined. But not all agents work that way and have that type of internal synergy. And Deadlock is one of those agents that don't. And I think Skye is also one of the other examples that don't as well. Hello, it's me from the future right now, and I realised that I forgot to say this. But agents that don't fit into their primary identity, such as Phoenix not fitting a dive duelist, as dive duelists are the strongest identity of a duelist. Phoenix not fitting that is not actually a problem for him necessarily, as there are metas and there are maps, there's niches that he fits into, so they don't actually have to fit into the best version of that role. They just have to have a niche that fits a purpose. And I think Deadlock is struggling to fit her purpose right now. So I think I have a pretty unpopular opinion about the traps. I don't think they should be able to detect you if you are walking. I think it makes sense that her abilities or her traps detect you when you make sound, because she's all about countering dive agents. And she wants to counter the agents when they're specifically diving. The problem is that her traps don't work that way in reality. While the actual like intention's there, she struggles to actually get the reward for the intention, if that makes sense. Where she doesn't actually get the payoff, the stun, if someone is dashing, because they can dash through it, right? So what I think needs to happen with her agents, with her trap, is that it needs to be able to track these diving agents. So I think it needs to be similar to Chamber Trap, where it can lock onto you and then fires the slow at you. I think it should fire the stun at them, and then in like a little circle or a little square, the stun goes off around them. So it's really hard for them to actually get out of it, because most likely the stun will go off on top of them where they've dashed onto, rather than midway through the dash, right? Or midway through whatever mobility they have, right? And in a lot of cases, to be fair, there are like times where like Yorus can like TP completely through it as well. So maybe upping the actual detection radius of that lock-on could be quite beneficial for her too. It might be a bit oppressive if it's that way. But to be honest, Cypher traps are pretty oppressive as they are right now, with the refreshing. If they don't die, if they get triggered, that is pretty oppressive. So I don't think Deadlock would be necessarily that oppressive with that version of traps either. And then next, I think the wall. So I think the wall is completely fine. I think the community on the whole is like down on Deadlock. Obviously, she's definitely the weakest agent in the game. So it does make sense the community is down on them. But I do think that overall, I don't think there's been the level of learning and progress that we would get if she was strong. So I think that the wall is actually fine. I think it just needs, people need time for the tech and the lineups. Even though it is, once again, it is unreliable, similar to Gravnet. But I think that it can get away with being more unreliable if its power level is there in the strong positions, right? Because Gravnet also had that problem where it wasn't even that strong in its like prime position, right? But I think that the wall has that opportunity. I do think it needs to have some sort of like strong buff to it, where maybe it's indefinite, or maybe you can get it back or something like that, right? Like you can recall it or something. I think it might need something like that. But for now, I think you can keep it as long as like they make the surrounding kit a bit more cohesive. And then finally we got ult, and I think ult is completely fine. It's basically a different version of ISO ult, honestly. So basically what ISO ult does is it catches someone, and then you basically say, interact with me and only me. And Deadlock ult is different, where you capture someone, like an ISO ult, obviously way different projectile, and then you basically say your teammates need to interact with you or you're dead. Basically is how I'd see it. Basically, it's just like a different formula for the same thing, where one person will die to the agent unless something specific happens, right? And that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, or if you found it helpful, then give it a like and comment something that you like about Deadlock, or if you think what she needs to change. I could be completely wrong on my actual changes or like what I think. And I would always like to know people's opinions in the comments. So yeah, I'll see you in my next one. Goodbye.